Good morning and welcome to the 10th meeting in 2025 of the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee. Now remember all members and witnesses to ensure that their devices are on silent. Just check mine. The first item on our agenda is to decide whether to take items 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 in private. Are members agreed? We're all agreed. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence as part of our work on building safety and maintenance, and I welcome our witnesses to the meeting. And we've got about 90 minutes for this discussion, and we're joined in the room by Murray Sharp, who's the Senior Manager of Housing at Clackmannanshire Council, Jackie Timmins, who's the Head of Area-Based Regeneration and Shared Repairs at Edinburgh City Council, Craig Dugdale, who's the Surveying Manager at Edinburgh City Council, Louise, I'm not sure I'm going to get your last name right, Butchart. I got it right, great, thank you. Who's the Head of Housing, Construction and Communities, and Gary Brady, who's the City Engineer in the Design and Property Services at Dundee City Council. And we're joined online by Susie Fitton, who is a Policy Manager at Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, otherwise known as SFHA, and Ewan McCallum, who is the Acting Housing Assets Manager at Angus Council. So welcome everyone this morning, and thanks so much for coming to help us understand these issues. We are going to turn to questions, and just to say, some people, just so that people watching are aware, some people on the panel are here to speak on issues relating to damp and mould, and others on RAC, and some of you are here to speak on both. We'll try to direct our questions to specific witnesses, but if you would like to come in, please do indicate to the clerk clearly. And for those of you online, please indicate that you want to come in by typing an R in the chat function, and then we'll bring you in. And there's no need for you to turn your microphones on and off. We'll do that for you. And for those of you online, there might be a little bit of a pause before your microphone turns on. Don't worry about that. We know that that's happening for folks who are joining by Zoom. We're aware of pauses is what I'm trying to say. So thanks for that. So I'm going to start on the section around dampness and mould. That's going to be our initial focus for this morning. And the first section is around tenants' experience and landlord practice. And hang on a minute. Having said that, now I need to remember who to direct my questions to. Okay, so this is for Louise and Craig, and Susie, if you want to come in, or you and online. So we'd be interested to hear how the volume of tenant complaints have changed around dampness and mould in their homes over the last couple of years. Do you have a sense of that? Has it gone up? Has it increased? Is it reduced? Who wants to come in on that one first?
Come in. That's,
all right, great.
We've seen an increase, I think, through media and stuff is pushing the tenants to come in and report it more now.
Right.
So now we're able to get in and try and fix it. We're set up a team in Edinburgh to do that. So the figures that we're starting to report now, between April and February this year, from April 24 to April to February this year, we've done circa 1,600 surveys throughout the city of Edinburgh just for damp, mould and condensation, which is an increase of about 600. That's purely because of the team, I think, that has been brought in, because now we've got the capacity to deal with it.
Right. Okay, and also because people are feeling more encouraged to actually report it.
Yes. Yeah. We've got it on our website, on the City of Edinburgh Council website now as well, reporting damp, mould and condensation. We've got pro-formers up in place so they can report it online. They can talk to the housing officers, or they can call the call centre, basically. Okay. And there's a dedicated team to deal with that now. Great.
Louise, how's it going where you are?
Yeah, no, I think similar to Craig, and in Dundee we've been doing a bit of work really over the past couple of years around tenant engagement, around dampness, mould and condensation, and look at developing our advice and information and working with our tenants so that they inform, so that the material in which we produce and the advice that we give is helpful. But I think something that we're continuing to work on. So over the past 2 years, we've had a dedicated damp, mould and condensation task and finish group. And this year we're refreshing that group. And part of that is looking at that engagement and consultation with our tenants and residents. I think if I look at the overall picture in Dundee over the last year, so we've had approximately 3.1% of our repairs overall are made up in respect of mould, dampness and condensation. But within that, a fairly significant spend. So we're looking at about 1.8 million over the past year, in which we've spent across Dundee City Council in tackling this. And that is approximately 7.24% of our overall expenditure around repairs and relets and maintenance within our stock. I think it's about continually looking at how we support and learn in terms of the solutions. So if we look at the stock profile in Dundee, we've got approximately 29 non-standard house types that will require different solutions to tackle. And it's working within our teams, but also with those experienced and specialists within the area to inform the targeted solutions. Part of it, though, for us is around the prevention. So to date, we've spent over 59 million in solutions to improve the fabric of our homes. Very much taking a fabric first approach, and that's set out within our asset management and energy efficiency and net zero strategy. So not just about the reactions.
That's great. I'm going to pause you there because we've got more questions on that when we come up. So I want to leave some more response for other colleagues who might ask about that. Murray, do you want to come in on the dampness and mould and the term of the numbers increasing?
Yeah, so very similar to my colleagues on my right-hand side there. So over the last couple of years, we have seen an increase in reporting of cases. We're now, on average, looking around 5% of our stock in terms of going through a damp or mould case per year. And that's been an increase around from about 2% pre-pandemic. That's, in some ways, as my colleagues have indicated, that can be a good story as well, because the worst thing that can happen sometimes with damp and mould is the under-reporting, or when people just leave it and it festers and gets worse. So sometimes tackling it early and actually getting on top of the actions that are required is sometimes really a good thing. So like my colleagues have said, we've really invested in the last couple of years. We've got a landing page on our website which details the information and how to contact us. We've also invested in resource. We've got trained professionals who go out and inspect the cases, and obviously making it easier for the customers to come forward. So we've got a booking system for the surveyor to actually go out and actually come and look at the damp cases.
All right, great, thanks. Anybody online? No. Anybody online want to come in on this? Okay, Susie, yeah.
So just to echo what other contributors have said, I think tenant understanding of the issues around damp and mould has increased, and housing associations and cooperatives have responded to this. They've got policies in place which set out clear standards and timescales for investigating and dealing with damp and mould. And the timescales will vary because of the root causes of the issue, but landlords triage repairs and damp and mould complaints are prioritised, especially when there's a known health issue. So the tenant will report the issue to the landlord, and the landlord will arrange inspection within a few days. And repairs and remediation would be arranged and carried out within the timescale set out in the repairs policy. The average time to complete non-emergency repairs is in the region of 9 working days. Where remediation is likely to take longer and where there are health issues that could be affected, our housing association and cooperatives will try and decant and rehouse tenants where possible. And our members are constantly exploring ways to improve performance. So some have or are looking at setting up rapid reaction teams to go into homes and deal with spores to minimise health risks, and some are testing out different technologies and solutions, and we share the learning through this via our forums, such as the Building Safety and Maintenance Forum. Sometimes it can be difficult to identify the root cause, and we'll probably talk about this in further detail as the session progresses. And some of our members report issues with contractor availability and challenges ensuring that they prioritise damp and mould. But there's a whole range of approaches for prioritising this. It's such an important issue, and a collaboration with tenants is absolutely key to resolving it.
Thanks very much, Susie, for your response. I'm going to add in another question and maybe kind of come back to Craig and Louise and Murray, but I'll stay with you, Louise. So in terms of, you were talking about all the work of the kind of rapid response teams and the difficulty in detecting the mold spores. And I'd be interested to hear a bit more about that. I think now's the opportunity to go into it a bit more in terms of what you're determining are the best methods to treat the problems and getting a better understanding of dampness and therefore mold in your stock, in the stock of your housing associations members.
So I think your colleagues will likely want to come in just to broaden on this.
Sorry, I'm going to Susie first because she brought it up, and then I'll come to you.
So undertaking proactive assessment of stock condition is really key. So taking a data-informed and a risk-based approach to prioritising a focus on properties particularly susceptible to damp and mould, training all staff to identify and respond to damp and mould, and seeing every home visit as an opportunity to identify issues is key. I think encouraging, as we've talked about, encouraging tenants to report damp and mould when they might otherwise not do so. So sharing communications on the risk of living with damp and mould, giving tenants clear, simple methods of reporting relevant issues, and ensuring that tenants don't feel blamed for the issues of damp and mould. Responding promptly, I've obviously talked about, and undertaking an assessment of the property to identify the root cause, and obviously adequate training and the correct equipment to do this is key. So treating the problem, the response will obviously vary depending on severity. So it can involve minor repairs such as fixing leaks or fixing windows. Installing an extractor fan is a fairly minor way of tackling condensation. And there can be obviously much more intensive works that are needed. So mould remediation, tackling ventilation and improving ventilation, terminal cleaning to neutralise and clean spores and bacteria, indoor air quality monitoring, introducing smart ventilation. And follow-up is really important, so checking that steps have been taken to resolve the issue and taking further action until the issue is resolved. And record keeping, again, is really important, so recording all the actions taken and ensuring that this data can be linked through to other information about the property and previous repair works. And then obviously taking positive steps if it does escalate to a complaint or a disrepair claim, taking positive steps to resolve the issue and learning from past cases, so improving processes where needed, and considering which property types might need further proactive work. So there's a lot of good practice examples across the sector where members are practicing this approach, and of course we'd always be happy to share information with members on this.
All right, great, thanks very much. Louise, before I come to you, I'm going to bring in Ewan because he hasn't spoken yet, and I think he indicated he wanted to come in, and I missed him in the previous question. So Ewan, if you can tell us about numbers, if that's what you want to do, but also you could talk a little bit about your, kind of in Angus Council, kind of the understanding of the damp and mould situation, how you're tackling it there. The microphone's not come on yet, so we're in our pause. Don't worry, you don't need to do anything. We're used to pausing.
Is that it working now?
Yep.
Thanks for letting me come in. Yeah, so at Angus Council, we've got 7,800 or so social rented homes, and like others, much the same picture. We've noted a marked increase in the number of requests for reports and reports of damp and mould. We think, in terms of our numbers, we've got damp or mould issues reported within circa 5% of our stock as well, and that's based on requests for damp surveys in the past year. And obviously, as others have said, that's based on, increased knowledge amongst people of the prevalence of the issue, and also us making people aware of that, tenants aware of that as well. So in terms of the steps we're taking ourselves, we currently have a reactive repairs officer with the appropriate accredited training who carries out reports and surveys on our behalf as well. And we're building up a team around him. We deliver our repairs slightly differently, and we're going through a review of that at the moment. So we do it through outsourced contracts with external contractors. However, for the most basic treatments of damp and mould, fungicidal washes, etc., we are using internal teams to help deliver that service because it just helps to expedite things. So that's a bit of a snapshot of where we are at the moment.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that. Louise, do you want to come in on the kind of how you're approaching the damp and mould and understanding what's going on in the stock? I'm interested also to get a sense of whether you're identifying the damp and mould in particular stock. Right? I don't know, I don't know if it was you or somebody said, yes, it was you, 29 non-standard housing stock. So is the damp and mould showing up in particular stock? Do you identify that, or is it just kind of across the board?
Yeah, I mean, I think to start, there's two aspects of this for us. So there's the investment in terms of energy efficiency measures, which, as you will be aware, is crucial in combating these conditions, with particularly poorly insulated homes being particularly susceptible. So what we've been doing in Dundee and noting this year in particular, through our rent setting process, we've got record levels in terms of investment around, the future proofing of our stock, and looking at, increasing the standards, particularly around energy efficiency, to mitigate some of the issues that come through from this. But as you'll appreciate, that will take some time for that to filter through. I think in terms of that reactive response, so much like what colleagues have said, but in terms of the solutions and the work that we're delivering in Dundee, your particular point around identifying particular stock, one of the actions that we're looking at progressing and are looking at currently is really looking at how we enhance our data analysis and almost looking at a GIS aspect to map out the reports that are coming through, what the trends are in terms of the stock and the fabric condition of that, and understanding the causes more deeply than what we do at the moment.
That, because we talked last week actually around the idea of mapping out where damp and mould. So with the GIS mapping work, is that also part of that, looking at the location,
Yes.
and then therefore the surrounding effects of being on a floodplain or something like that?
Yes, that's correct.
That's great that you're doing that. Anybody else want to come in? Craig, do you want to come in?
Just the team that's in the City of Edinburgh Council consists of 4 qualified surveyors, CSRT and CSSW. When they go out on a survey, we've also got 8 dedicated housing officers that's in the team, directly working for the damp, mould and condensation team. They'll go out on survey with our surveyors. So our surveyors will then assess the situation, try and find the source of the problem. Whilst they're doing that, our housing officers are liaising with the tenant. It may well be the case of fuel poverty is there, and that's where they can then start to deal with that side of it, because albeit our surveyors are first class, they'll tell you what's caused the damp. As soon as you start talking about fuel poverty, they're kind of lost. That's where we bring in the expertise of our in-house housing officers. And then it means we're given a full package. It's not just the damp survey we're doing, we're trying to make it better for the tenant.
Okay, great. And Murray?
Yeah, so it's almost like we're in tune, but in terms of the identification, certainly it is a troubling situation, obviously, in terms of the rise, although, as I indicated earlier, sometimes that can be good as well. So in Clackmannshire, obviously, 80% of our stock is EPC C or above. So we've done quite well in terms of our energy efficiency works quite early on in terms of the response to the SHQS. And hopefully that stood us in good stead in terms of some of our responses going forward in terms of some of the issues related to fuel poverty. But I would say, in terms of, as my colleagues have indicated, it does need to be data-led. If I reflect back the way when I first started with the council, there was a heavy reliance on reports from contractors, etc. And sometimes these reports from contractors could be sometimes contradictory, and that's where, if we've heard from colleagues, we've invested as well in internal trained resource to make sure that it's it's taking a wholesale approach, looking at the asset. So sometimes when you ask a contractor to go and look at a particular issue, they just report on that issue and not look at the house composition in its whole in terms of what might be driving particular issues. But similarly to what Louise had indicated, we've noticed some concerns with some properties where perhaps climate change, and I think some of your witnesses alluded to this last week in terms of increased rainfall, water drainage not draining away as effectively as it can be. So we've committed to a stock condition survey during the course of the year, and that's one of the issues where we're going to be providing our data to the people who are going to be doing the stock condition analysis for us to try and home in on some of this issue to make sure that we can try and be as proactive as we possibly can be with some of these properties going forward, rather than relying on the tenants.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. That's been a very helpful beginning. I'm going to bring in Willie Coffey, who's got a couple of questions.
Thanks very much and good morning, everybody. A couple of questions from me. Firstly, just to ask colleagues, in your authority, when your houses are void and about to be re-let to a new tenant, do you systematically investigate the condition of the property? And if it is showing signs of dampness, mould or condensation, do you continue to allocate that house to a tenant, or would you prevent that until it's remedied? Craig?
We have weekly meetings with our voids team throughout the city, and if there's any voids that have got any signs of damp, mould or condensation in them, they hand them straight over to the damp team. We then take the ownership of it. We'll then rectify the issue, and once that's done, we hand it back to the voice team, and then they will carry on and do what they need to do in order to get it handed back over to housing. If there's any pause, you know, if there's been a lengthy time over winter, for instance, where no heating nor ventilation's happening, and you might start to get a little bit mould back, it's picked up prior to it being handed in, and we go back in and just fix that. But 9 times out of 10, we're managing to hand it over and then get them back to voids. Voids won't do anything with a damp property without passing it to us.
Okay. Could I ask for other views from colleagues? Do you, by and large, do you not allocate a house if it's damp and mouldy?
Yeah, so similar, but in Dundee, so part of our letting process is we have our letting standard, and part of that check is looking at, you know, the historical reports coming through around, you know, it could be a variety of repairs, but inclusive of that is dampness, mould and condensation reports, which will then be considered as part of the relet to determine if those have been rectified. But obviously there's that visual inspection looking at the condition of the property at the point that it's become void to ensure that it meets our letting standard before we relet that property.
Okay. Other views? Is it the same elsewhere? Or?
Yeah, we involve our tenants actually in the void process, so as much as possible. So where properties become void, we try and allocate as quickly as possible, and Clackmannshire, Mr Stewart will know this, and we try and involve the tenants to come along to the void property to look at the condition and agree on the works that's going to happen. We obviously, tenant choice is part of that in terms of decorating rooms as part of that work, and obviously as part of that check we do look for dampness and mould, and that will be tackled first and foremost. But there is occasions where sometimes, as my colleague indicated, where there's challenges over, especially in winter, with heating systems being switched on with gas and power, and I think the committee's heard about that previously, where sometimes that on the onset of winter, etc., that can be a challenge. But of course, it's something we strive to make sure that we eliminate as much as possible.
Okay. Ewan, can I bring you in on this as well?
Yep, I'm happy to comment, and basically, you know, as previously, I'm echoing what others have said. You know, we have a relet standard that we've just revisited, and it includes specific items in terms of looking at damp and mould. But we do have several. We've got a process for dealing with complex voids, and they sit out with the normal process, because some of these works are more complicated than others. So, you know, it's not all of these issues can be dealt with just a fungicidal wash. So we've taken the view that we'll park those and deal with those specifically through our repairs contractors. So that's really what we're doing. And Angus,
can I just ask you on the complex issues? Does that mean you're actually maybe taking out bits of the wall or something like that to really remove the mould that's kind of arrived into the building?
Yeah, well, there can be quite significant issues as well. It's been mentioned previously, I think maybe in the session last week, but we are seeing an increase in the build-up of moisture in the solums, the space below the floor, and areas like that can be more complex to deal with. So we've got a number of voids that are actually held currently while we're addressing these more significant issues. It can also be things like cracks in external render that have allowed water to build up. And I think it's been mentioned before, but our view is that climate change is directly contributing to this as well. We've got a bit of a perfect storm because, sorry, that's not meant to be a pun, but there's with an increased amount of rainfall soaking walls and perhaps energy hikes as well, it's meant that it's sometimes more difficult for people to heat their homes. Because that would normally be a mechanism to dry out the walls in the house as well. So we're seeing some quite complex ones that are, we're holding, we're making sure we're taking steps, so that we're not just reletting them and opening ourselves up to further issues, and indeed the tenants up to further issues.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So when your tenants sign up for a property and part of the missive agreement and so on, is there a clear indication to them about the condition of the house and a clear statement to them that there is no damp and mould in the house that they're about to occupy? Do they get that, or is it not like that? Is that agreement in writing with the tenant that gives them an assurance about the condition of the house?
That is portrayed to the tenant when they sign up to the tenancy.
Louise?
Yeah, so in Dundee, I touched on it earlier, there's a letting standard. So part of the viewing process is going through the property and highlighting, the works that have been carried out and the level of standard that we're letting then the property at. As part of our tenants information pack, then there's further information provided around supporting the tenant once they remain and live in the property. So there is that reflection piece on what we've done and the condition to which we've brought the property to at the point of relet.
Yeah, but does it make clear that there is no damp and mould, for example, or does it not make that clear?
So I think, and part of it for me is important to have that feedback from tenants as to whether or not it's clear. I think from my perspective, it's, from officers making sure that they're really clear at the viewing and clear at that signing point around the condition of the property and that we're letting it of the understanding that there isn't a live issue in terms of dampness, mould and condensation. But that maybe is something, for us to understand directly from our tenants as to whether or not they feel it's clear coming through.
Okay. Any other views on that? Or is it quite clear and obvious to tenants about the condition? Craig, come back again.
I do know that since we started, the damp, mould and condensation guides that we've had printed go into the new tenancy packs, and there's advice given right at the very start, but I'm not sure if they're told about the house never having or not having damp, mould and condensation at any time.
Okay. I could just ask follow. Somebody else coming in? Sorry.
Murray wants to come in, I think.
I can't see it.
Sorry, it's an interesting point. Obviously, I've explained that manager. Our approach is obviously to involve the tenant in the early on process of the void period, and obviously discuss the works that we're going to be carrying out. So it's not something we provide as some statement to identify that it's free of damp and mould. Essentially, though, that all landlords or social landlords are working to make sure that properties are provided to tenants in a safe, secure manner and that they're all fit for purpose, and that includes heating systems, electrics, etc. So the whole range of standards. So there would be a question of, it might be quite an interesting point to reflect on, but where would you stop with some of that identification in terms of what works you've done?
Okay. On the procedures that are in place, Susie, you described processes as you understand it about when a tenant may report an issue about damp and mould. And it's just to ask other colleagues, do you follow a similar process? I've been a local authority councillor for many years and a member of this place, and I have numerous contacts from constituents that are a bit confused about where they stand with respect to these issues. And when they report it and the teams turn up to do their best to repair it, there isn't any kind of formal notice to the tenant that it's fixed, sorted. That's it. They will tend to come along and in some cases do the fungicidal wash that we know and love for many years, and that sometimes is it. There is no communication beyond that with tenants that we think that's fixed now and you can be confident and assured and so on. It's just to touch base with you about that wider issue and whether you do that in your own area. Craig?
Once the tenant raises a survey with us, we've got a dampness case tracker. So that date that they've contacted us is put in. The date of the survey is then put in. The date that the survey was carried out is put in. And it goes on and on and on until we're complete. And once we're complete on a job, it's marked with that date. And we've got a date-sensitive cell that will turn red 8 weeks after the completion of that. Our housing officers then call or visit the tenant and go over the job that they've had done and make sure that what's been done is worked. And if it's not worked, that's when we will go back without the tenant having to go through the whole process of raising new surveys and calls and stuff. We just take ownership of it straight away. So it's an 8 week period just for drying out purposes. So if we've done new plaster and stuff like that, we need to let it dry. So that's the communication part that we've brought in to try and encourage the tenants to be honest with us. And we've only just started it about 8 months ago, and it's starting to show that we're getting some positive feedback from that.
Is that a verbal thing, Craig, to effectively sign that off? Is it done verbally, or do the tenants get any kind of record or note from the authority?
Sorry, the tenant gets a copy of the survey report right at the very start. So we give them a copy of the surveyor's report with all the schedule and the details and the plan and everything that we're going to do. They've got that. As soon as we've signed it off, as in completion, 8 weeks from then, we make contact. And it could well be a contact just over the phone. It could be an actual visit if they prefer to visit. But initially, it's a phone call to say, would it be okay to come and visit just to make sure everything's okay.
So it's a completion record?
Yeah, and then we just sign it off as a completed job.
Okay.
So I've got Susie and then Murray wanted to come in. Susie.
So,
Yeah, I think we can hear you.
that's great. Yeah, I just wanted to feed back on the elements of an effective approach, and the points that were made about effective communication. I think certainly our input from members has shown that communication with tenants is absolutely critical. And having a supportive approach. We've already touched on some of the underlying contributors to the problem of damp and mould and the cost of living crisis, fuel poverty. 61% of tenants in social housing are living in fuel poverty. And we know that supportive communication with tenants supporting tenants to report issues of damp and mould where they may be worried about doing so is absolutely crucial. And it's I think just echo what's been said by other contributors that whilst sometimes damp and mould is due to structural issues, it can also be a direct result of households being unable to afford to heat their homes adequately. Some of our members are reporting cases of tenants switching off extractor fans due to concerns about running costs. So ensuring that homes are energy efficient and that occupants have the resources to heat their homes is essential, and the wider work that housing associations and cooperatives do to provide support with energy costs, affordable heat, welfare rights advice and income maximisation work are all elements that might not be specific to a repairs approach, but help to address the underlying causes.
Okay.
Murray.
Yeah, I was just going to say in terms of the point about the the sort of clarification at the end stage. That's maybe something actually in terms of the regulator who's going to start collecting data on that might be prevalent to what they're looking at in terms of going forward, because some of obviously there's antisocial behaviour indicator which has got a clear time frame for indicating to the tenant that the case is complete, etc. But in terms of the movement in terms of the public sector, at Clark's we're about to embark on implementing a new IT system. So I would see it as part of the new IT system and being critical in terms of providing access to the tenant and customer so that they have a clear visual view in terms of the repairs history for their property, and they can see themselves what actions have been taken, so that accords with their understanding of what's happening, so they can see whether the case has been closed within that system. I think that's the most efficient and effective way, is actually just providing that access to the tenant and customer.
Okay, thanks, Murray. Anybody else? If not, thank you.
No. Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much. Now I'm going to bring in Mark Griffin.
Thanks, Kevin. Good morning. At previous committee sessions, we've heard particularly representatives of tenants groups talk about a lack of trust and faith in landlords when it comes to identifying issues with damp and mould, and then issues of trust with contractors who are remedying it. And I just wonder if you're aware of that kind of level of mistrust, how prevalent you feel it is, and whether that's an issue when it comes to interacting with tenants. Start with Murray.
Yeah, that is part of I would say, maybe not wholesale experience, but it is part of our understanding. And I would suggest that's why we've all indicated this morning that we've perhaps moved on as a sector, as in the local government sector, in terms of recruiting and training their own staff, in terms of doing the surveying work in-house. As I referenced early on, when a number of years ago when I started with the council, we would have a reliance on contractors, and sometimes those reports would be contradictory for both ourselves and the tenant in terms of the works that would be required. So that's where it's come down to having our own surveyors fully trained and actually going and doing the sort of wholesale house asset approach in terms of the work that's required, so that you've got that sort of full understanding of what is then required. So there's no discrepancy when the contractor turns up to do some actions and work that is based on the survey and work that we've identified through that process. And I think that's, as anything, obviously trust can only be gained and achieved via your actions. And I think that's perhaps why we've all reflected on perhaps previous practices which might not have been working as well as we might have hoped, and that's why we've perhaps switched to this new approach in terms of, certainly for us at Clark's, having an internal resource.
Thank you. Anybody else? Craig or Louise?
Yeah, obviously, just what Murray's saying, if we've got, or we found there was issues with contractors and the mistrust and stuff because they were in and out in 5 minutes, it's as quick as they could get in, do the survey and get back out again. Our surveyors are in-house and officers are usually in the property, could be an hour and a half to 2 hours, and they're talking to the tenant and looking at the property, their liaison and letting the tenant know exactly what is wrong, what's caused it, and what we can do to resolve it. We've also got our in-house dedicated craft operatives, the preservation craft operatives, so we're not subcontracting that element out. So what our surveyors find and recommend, our own internal preservation team are doing the treatments, and there's that trust that we're starting to gain, and we have found that we've had emails from tenants recently just saying thank you. This has been a great experience, something that we've not experienced ever from the council. So I think the in-house teams definitely works because it's more personal. It's definitely more personal.
Thanks. Louise?
Yeah, I think as well there is a bit here though for us in Dundee to hear that back directly. So what we're looking at in Dundee, and we've been doing some work with our Dundee Fairness Leadership Panel, who are engaging directly with customers and also with the third sector who are receiving some of these reports, and looking at how we better engage through regular engagement sessions to get that feedback directly, but also enhancing that understanding, so tenant satisfaction. So at the minute we measure it based on our repair service and we're sitting just shy of 90% in terms of satisfaction. But I think for me to more drill into the particular issue around dampness, mould and condensation as part of that process, to hear directly if there's that mistrust or dissatisfaction around the service in which we've delivered.
Okay, thanks. Susie, can I come to you and ask if that's an issue you're aware of amongst your members? And particularly it seems to be a trend from witnesses in the room about a move to in-house provision when it comes to surveying and remedy. I just wonder if that's a picture that's replicated across your member associations.
So just to reflect on what you've mentioned about trust, and just to echo what people have said, I think mistrust caused by a perception of tenants being blamed for damp and mould is something that our members across Scotland are very keen to remedy, and in-house provision where possible for housing associations is a key part of that. Housing associations and cooperatives are part of the communities that they serve. They represent the communities that they provide affordable housing to, and absolutely nobody that works in social housing. Our members are charities. They're not-for-profit organisations dedicated to providing safe, warm, affordable homes. And the commitment is there to support with tenants to resolve these issues and to collaborate with them in order to do that.
Okay, thanks for that. If I can stay with you, Susie, the Scottish Government have proposed amendments at stage 2 to the housing bill, and that is to make it easier for social housing tenants with damp and mould to get those homes fixed within a set timescale. I just wonder what SFHA's position is on that proposed change to the housing bill, whether you have a view on whether legislation is necessary or not.
So at SFHA, we understand completely the desire to act to improve outcomes on this issue. And of course, we would look forward to working with Scottish Government, with our members, on any policy development process that would need to follow any introduction of enabling powers in this regard. We do have some notes of perhaps caution for the committee, because when we've discussed these proposals with members, I think there was a feeling that there are significant differences between the social housing sectors in Scotland and England. So we've got the Social Housing Charter, the need for compliance with the Scottish Housing Quality Standard, the policies and procedures that landlords already have in place to address instances of damp and mould, the new regulator charter indicators on damp and mould, which will provide data on performance in the sector in relation to damp and mould ahead of any enabling powers being produced by these amendments actually taking effect. So I think there was a feeling that it would potentially be useful to allow the collection of this data to bed in and to understand the picture fully. Social landlords in Scotland, as we've already talked about, have policies with clear standards and timescales for investigating and dealing with damp and mould and prioritising those. And these timescales are often shorter than those being considered in discussions around implementing AWAB's law. So some of our members really felt that there should be a greater focus on support for the social sector to make the best use of existing stock and appropriate use of technology in diagnosing and resolving issues with damp and mould. This isn't addressed, obviously, in terms of a focus on timescales. And diagnosing and tackling damp and mould, as we've already alluded to, can be complicated. And so we wanted to ensure that focusing on timescales wasn't counterproductive in terms of contractors striving to meet targets at the expense of proper diagnosis of the issue. So that's really our position, but certainly our position will evolve, I'm sure, as the legislative process evolves too. The hazards included within the scope of any statutory provisions have yet to be identified. And they include many others beside damp and mould. So there's lots of work here to do in terms of clarifying how these are going to be monitored. And I think what I would finish by saying is, if the intention is to introduce statutory timescales, this shouldn't be and can't be the only thing that we do about damp and mould. The supply and allocation challenges during a housing emergency must be addressed. We've got a chronic shortage of social homes in Scotland. The cost of living crisis and the energy crisis and how tenants are heating their homes is crucial to this. The impact of fuel poverty, which I've already talked about, the costs of retrofit, the challenges with making repairs in mixed tenure blocks, and competing priorities experienced by housing associations and cooperative all impact on efforts to tackle this problem. So they must also be considered alongside any decisions on statutory timescales.
Thanks for that, Susie. Put your hand back.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Just before we go on, we're going to close the windows and they make a noise. I didn't want to just do it in the middle of responding to questions because it's a bit loud. But let's see how loud it is. There we go. Okay, so I'll continue on though. So I'm going to ask the next question. So it's kind of around the theme of other ideas for improvement. So I think it was Murray. You already mentioned the ideas, the actions that are being undertaken by the Scottish Government and the housing regulator, such as the issuing of guidance and collection of monitoring indicators. I'd be interested to hear from yourselves if there's any other action that government could take to drive forward improvements in the prevention and treatment of damp and mould in homes. And maybe I'll start with you, Murray.
Yeah, so I think Susie laid out the position quite well there, and I think she reflected on quite a few areas of good practice. And I would suggest, obviously, that there is a movement now in terms of really trying to understand the home and the condition of the home and what's actually happening within the home. So obviously there's a movement towards introducing sensors. Obviously some of our colleagues have went quite far, so Stirling Council have installed 1,100 sensors in their homes already, and we are just about to embark on a pilot of a number of our houses, looking at the environmental conditions to really identify and hopefully potentially early identification without the tenant even notifying us of issues within the property that we can then react to. So even before a tenant might even notice that there might be an issue or a challenge, that we're contacting them or visiting them to say we've identified that there's a potential issue that needs to be further investigated, and similarly take that across similar property types across our stock. So that's the work that we're looking to do, is invest in sensor technology to try and be a lot more proactive and actually be a lot more informed about the position that's going on in our homes.
Okay, thanks. A couple of questions, and then I'll open it out to other people. But just so something, the committee's been doing this piece of work around building safety and maintenance for quite a while, and I think we started our journey in cladding, and then RAC showed up, and then damp and mould came along. And something that's come up across some of those discussions is a couple of ideas. One, the idea that maybe what we need in Scotland is a database in local authorities that tell us what houses are actually made of, so that we understand the materials and the potential problems, or and maybe it's even before we even get there, a better understanding of what we're allowing houses to be made of. I'm just adding that in. And then the other idea is being shorthand termed an MOT. So the idea of regular kind of maintenance of buildings, just like we have to take a car in for an MOT. And it sounds to me, in a way, you're already beginning to look at that in a way with CLAC's manager around that proactive approach you've just described. Yeah,
interesting that you referenced the MOT. As part of the 2006 legislation that went through the Parliament here, that was a suggestion put forward by the CIH of Scotland at that stage early on, was proactive MOTs about every 5 or 10 years, particularly for communal stock. But obviously you could choose for how in depth those MOTs might or might not be, but certainly a data-led approach in terms of using the data as well as possible, and then using that to be reflective in terms of your stock condition survey and mapping that across your assets is something really the sector. The chance we've now got with AI technology to try and take that forward is upon us, really, as we've reached this stage in technology advances. In terms of some of the considerations in terms of building up a database, I would say somewhat that would need to be going forward. Sounds a really good idea in case anything in the future comes up about any particular items or frameworks that have been used in terms of building homes or properties, that would be great, because it's one thing that it has hindered us, certainly in Clarks, is really that backward view in terms of some of our stock. And obviously you've seen some landlords struggle with the identification of that because they just didn't have some of these historical records. So yeah, going forward, great idea, and build it up, yeah.
Okay, great. Louise?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of bits for me around that. So in terms of social landlords or asset management database should really be capturing some of the information that you're reflecting on in terms of, you know, stock condition, quality and the aspects of it. So in Dundee, we're about to commission in this forthcoming year 100% building conditions survey. And that essentially will continue to build upon our existing database and enhance it in terms of, you know, referencing what is the building made of, you know, what are the measures that we've got installed, and that obviously informs we would direct our capital plan moving forward. In terms of that regular maintenance, that essentially feeds from your building conditions survey, in addition to the reactive service that you deliver. But I think, you know, most important for me in an area that we are investing is understanding our data. So understanding, you know, what are the challenges in terms of property and asset, what are the uncontrollables around that, you know, what is the aspect of fuel poverty, and are we directing our advice services and supports where they need to be, and what are the solutions that are working and effective, and what needs to move. So I think that aspect of it does evolve.
We've currently got 500 properties under pilot with sensors, and they're sending data every 15 minutes. We're recording relative humidity and temperature and calculating the dew point. So if we get an alert, it'll either be a dampness detected or dampness predicted. And if it's dampness detected, then our housing officers are arranging a survey to be carried out ASAP. If it's dampness predicted, either our housing officers or our surveyors will be calling that tenant just to see if something in the environment's changed, because it could very well be that they've moved a relative in over Christmas or something, and it's increased the relative humidity, and something simple like that. But we're doing volumetric exercise just now on increasing that pilot by, I think it's 2,000 properties throughout the city, and the data is very proactive. It's putting us on the front foot, to be honest, because the data that we're getting, it actually, we can backtrack and see what the relative humidity was doing. When we go in to do a survey, we'll take a hygrometer reading. The hygrometer reading's a snapshot in time. It'll tell us what the relative humidity and temperature is at this precise time. It won't tell us what it was doing this morning at 8 o'clock. So these sensors will give us it all the way through 24 hours a day. So that's how we're being a bit proactive about it.
That seems like a great idea. And when you kind of gather the data, is that pulled together? Are you using, I think, Murray, you mentioned the use of AI. Are you using AI yet for kind of analysing?
We've
not gone there yet?
No.
Okay. Ewan, can I just check with you if you've got any other ideas for improvement?
A similar picture, I think, to what others are describing there, although I think we're maybe slightly behind the curve in some areas. But we're certainly looking to commence the pilot in environmental monitoring sensors. That's a plan that we've got. We're looking at, I think, 200 initially. And we're going to use sensors that are sophisticated enough to give data on temperature, moisture, carbon dioxide, air quality generally as well. And our intention was to spread it around the different house types that we've got so we'd get data. There was an earlier part of the question that was about tracking the different types of properties that we've got. Our incumbent housing system already includes some basic information on that. However, we've got a new housing asset management system that we're implementing at the moment, and that will allow us to put a lot more of that kind of data on it and record things like where there's been issues of damp and mould. And that will allow us to target our investment going forward as well.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that. So I'm just aware of time. We're almost an hour into, and we're not really deeply fully on into our questions. But we have touched on in terms of damps and mould, I think we've started to touch a little bit on some of what's coming next. We've got 2 more colleagues with questions, and then we're going to move, Gary and Jackie, we're going to move to RAC after that. So, but I'm going to have to ask us all to get a bit more concise, and probably what we'll do is we'll go to a point where, unless you've got a completely opposite view of what's being said, we might ask you to hold off. So I'm going to bring in Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. We've already touched on this morning the issues when it comes to the cost of living and how that's impacting on individuals and the way they manage their properties and how that progresses, and to what extent it's really having an impact on the dampness and mould, because they're not using effectively or efficiently their heating within their home, because they're fearful of sometimes the cost that's going to incur. And Susie, you touched on that when you mentioned about where that was going, but it would be good to get a flavour from some of the councils if that is very much the case, that you're finding that individuals are struggling, and because they're struggling, they're not keeping their heating on at a certain time, or they're switching things off, and that's having an impact on the keeping that whole process going within the property. Do you have anything like that? Maria, maybe come to you first.
I couldn't comment on particular in terms of the damp cases, but yeah, your point that you're making, we've had a number of tenant engagement sessions around our budget and around our rent proposals for the last couple of years, and as part of those proposals we've had money advice teams or energy efficiency team and whatever being there to provide support, and we hear tenants all the time where they struggle because of the price increases, and especially in gas and electric. So yeah, it's a prevalent issue. I couldn't reflect it precisely back to damp, but yeah, it is an ongoing issue and challenge for tenants. As Susie's referenced there, we're dealing with a sector or a group of tenants who are some of the poorest in society, and obviously then they're facing significant price increases in their energy costs. And
are others in the same position in Dundee and Edinburgh? You would find the same situation?
We've not got the exact figures, but we're doing an awful lot more change works referrals, purely because of the fuel poverty affecting the damp and condensation.
And Susie, you mentioned about the support. You talked about income maximisation and something along that line. How effective is that to ensure that that information has been given to tenants, and then they act on that? And that does help, or it prevents, or it supports, or it assists them in going forward?
So our members, so housing associations, cooperatives, have a range of ways that they support tenants to ensure that they're receiving the benefits and social security that they're entitled to. So some offer in-house welfare rights provision, and some signpost to third sector and other providers. And I think that's absolutely crucial in terms of supporting tenants to get to be able to afford to heat their homes and ventilate their homes appropriately. We hear more and more about tenants being too frightened to put their heating on, and we know that the Scottish House Condition Survey shows that social tenants were more likely to say that the reason why their home was hard to heat was that they couldn't afford to heat it. So we need joined up policy making to tackle this issue. Efforts to tackle poverty more generally will improve tenant experiences of their homes. So anything from welfare reform, cash first approaches to supporting tenants to heat their homes properly, right through to energy market reform that is necessary to try and combat the energy price rises and the disparity between tenants who receive different types of or use different types of heating systems. And instead of unpredictable rounds of funding, so like the Fuel Insecurity Fund, which whilst extremely valuable has obviously come to an end, we need a multi-year approach to this. So SFHA has been calling for some form of cost of living fund. But we've certainly been adding our voice also to the call for a social tariff, which would mean that more vulnerable people, including a lot of social tenants, would have more guarantees about the energy bills that they will face. And I think this is fundamental to the approach to tackling damp and mould is to try and tackle the underlying causes and the things that impact it.
Thank you.
You want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think Susie's covered that, really well in terms of that holistic approach and the areas that we need to consider. I probably reflect back on the data and understanding the root cause of which it could be mixed, and as Susie's just highlighted there. So for me at the moment is making sure that we've got that energy advice and support in the city to support. So examples of that reflecting on the previous year is we've renegotiated over 150,000 of fuel debt on behalf of our tenants. We've cleared a further 150,000 in fuel debt for tenants. So it's looking at the supports and measures we've got in place whilst we're, progressing this through.
Okay. And the Scottish Government have said now they will not progress with the Heat and Buildings Bill as it currently is drafted because they're not satisfied and they want to wait until there's more satisfaction on the implementation and that will take place that will secure and help fuel poverty and deal with that. So that in itself is a problem going forward if that is not now going to progress to the same level and the impact that will have. So it would be good to get your views on what impact, if any, you think that might have on preventing damp and mould within houses. And also what you think should be in the bill that would alleviate some of the problem, because the delay now may mean that it's going to be further on before we get to some of those solutions that may have been in that bill. Who wants to jump in?
That's some question.
Sorry.
You got anything on sport? I have to declare an interest. I've recently had a home where we've just moved from that had a heat pump. Okay. And this perhaps reflects back on your last question, which actually some of the best tariffs in the marketplace just now are not available wholesale. Yeah. So, for example, you see British Gas and Vaillant have specific tariffs at 14 and 15 pence a kilowatt hour for electricity, for example, but they're not wholesale available. They're only available to exclusive parts of the market. So those who have got heat pumps well installed and are use them in the correct fashion will be paying substantially less than their neighbour potentially on mains gas. And that's one of the challenges about the tweaks in terms of some of the legislation, is that sometimes it's the uncertainty of the investment and actually the uncertainty of the discussions with tenants. There's already a lot of mistrust around some of these new technologies. So sometimes the mistrust of the moving forward of dates makes some of that investment decision for us as landlords difficult. The discussions with tenants even more challenging. So I think it's a situation which we need to be reflective of in terms of going forward, because I think it's been done, obviously, outlined in terms of fuel poverty, but that doesn't perhaps take cognizance of the full picture that's perhaps out there already in terms of the marketplace.
Okay. Anybody else, Louise?
I think we've given a commitment in Dundee through our approach around Fabric First and investment towards having, increased energy efficiency homes, but also looking at the decarbonisation around that. I think what we have clearly set out, though, within our strategy is that, our options appraisal and processes to inform those measures will not put households in a worse position than they are at the moment and increase that fuel poverty aspect. So that's the driver for us at this point in time to continue with that approach.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, Jackie?
On the issue I manage the mixed tenure improvement service in Edinburgh, so I think the social housing sector will continue to do the Fabric First approach, as Louise is saying, and we'll go across the city and do as much as we can. But where the Heat and Buildings Bill delay is going to affect us is for mixed tenure properties and for the landlords, private landlords and owner-occupiers that don't have that drive now through the legislation to actually do anything and come along with us. And that was in the working groups that we were involved in. It was aligning those standards was really, really important to give us all, a platform to move along on the same journey. But it looks like the social housing sector will be in front of the private sector if this delay
And
happens.
you know, what sort of knock-on effect will that have within the tenure within Edinburgh?
So at the moment, some of the areas we're in right now are 50-50 private and council. So we are completely relying on owners agreeing to the works, you know, and they are expensive. And the areas that we are in are deprived areas. The highest deprivation areas in Edinburgh is where we start. Condition of properties are poor. And the tenure we try and move in areas where the council own more to give us more ability to push these forward. But in the area that we're in at the moment, it's 50-50 we're discovering. So it's not helpful, and it's going to put a lot of blockers in our way to try and we're doing this for our tenants, you know, and some of these tenants will lose out because we can't improve some of these properties.
You know, they won't have the opportunity because of the delay to the things to happen, and that will have a knock-on effect on what can be achieved, and for yourselves as well, that's going to create even more of a backlog and a system failure, and primarily going to happen within the process.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to answer? Susie, thank you.
So I think it's right to say that the Heat in Buildings Bill needs to tackle both fuel poverty and the climate emergency. I think SFHA have always been clear on that. I think our concern is that further delay isn't the answer. Our members across Scotland are heavily involved and committed to the clean heat transition, and there's numerous examples of SFHA members upgrading the energy efficiency of homes and installing clean heat systems, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, clean heat networks. But we are very clear that the transition must be fair and just, and that means that the cost burden must not sit with those least able to pay, and those are social tenants via their rent. And social landlords need affordable funding mechanisms so that the cost of meeting heat in buildings doesn't result in unaffordable rent increases. There is a concern, obviously, about the practicalities of trying to transition to clean heat in mixed tenure blocks, as has already been alluded to. There's also a need to ensure sufficient skills in the supply chain so that we've got quality in terms of quality of installations, and confidence in the quality of installations, and assurance that contractors will be available for ongoing maintenance. There's lots of issues. We've outlined some of our key policy asks on the transition and decarbonisation. We are just finalising a policy position paper on the transition to net zero. So I'll be sure to send the paper to the committee when it's published.
Okay.
Thank you, Convener.
Thanks very much. I'm going to bring in Fulton. I see. So this is retrofitting of insulation to existing homes. We've started to touch in on your area, but bring in your question.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning to the panel and those online. My apologies for being late. I had some train troubles today, and as the Convener's already touched on, obviously when you're late you run the risk that you might have already started to touch on some of the answers either earlier or in your opening statements. So apologies if that is the case, and just feel free to say. But my questions around the committee's heard that damp and mould problems can be created or exacerbated by poor quality installation or insulation to existing homes. And I'm wondering what your organisations are doing to ensure that renovations and retrofits will not create damp and mould problems for tenants into the future. I mean, I know the size of the panel, Convener, I don't perhaps need everybody to answer, but if anybody's wanting to come in.
Okay,
Jackie.
So in our work, we are looking at the whole building. It's the whole house approach. So the insulation, we're looking at where the dew point happens, make sure the insulation is designed to the right thickness, the right type. But we're also taking into account ventilation of these properties, so that's really important. That's part of the process that we go through when we design the insulation measures. We're extending roof lines, making sure that insulation won't get wet, putting on deeper gutters because of the climate change issues. Just taking that whole house approach. Hope that answers your question.
And you feel that approach does safeguard, tenants into the future, and how long into the future do you feel?
So one of the big improvement schemes that we've just finished out of Wester Hales, we've got scientific evidence coming back from the suppliers to say that the dew point would have been inside the wall in the winter time, so there's a high risk of damp. Putting the insulation on completely removes that risk of damp from the property. So obviously got condensation risk inside the property, and Craig's probably more on the technical side with this, but the ventilation is just key to that. So we make sure that the ventilation trickle vents are working, ventilation's adequate, is the right type of ventilation. And the insulations comes with 25-year warranties from the manufacturers, as long as it's maintained. So it should last longer than that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I would say it is a challenge. I reflected earlier, I'd moved house during the summer, and one of the things that we looked at moving house was looking at energy efficiency. And there was sometimes these works are difficult because to actually check on the insulation, you've got to involve bore scopes and whatever. So we discovered that the cavity wall had slumped, it hadn't been put in properly and whatever. So you've got the cost falls on you to then remove that poor insulation. So I think your witness last week at the committee, it was a really call for arms in terms of a real reflection for the sector, I think, in terms of making sure that there's a balance between getting the fabric first approach that Louise spoke about, but not taking it too far, because there's perhaps houses that we've met perhaps in the past we've taken perhaps beyond the point where the house can suitably take those measures. And going forward, that has to be the point where we need to be considerate in terms of what are we actually focusing. So obviously the discussion about the heat and building strategy has got that in its place in terms of how far do you take the reduction in the heat demand of the building versus the cost of insulating the system and getting that up to speed. So there is a balance to be struck, and I think that last week's comments at the committee are really a sort of call to arms and reflection piece for the sector about how far can you take actually some of our existing stock beyond perhaps EPC-C as it were.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, Camilla, thank you very much. Thanks.
Just before we move on to the reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, I have to say that because otherwise I don't remember which way the A's go part. I just wanted to come back, and Murray, I'm going to go to you because you've mentioned that you've mentioned that you looked at our sessions last week, and one of the things that came up and I thought was very interesting was the call from Gloria Flo to look at solar thermal as a way of a more cost-effective way of potentially getting heating into people's houses, and a call to allow, certainly in the private sector, the focus on government grants is for air source heat pumps primarily. And her call was maybe we need to be looking at thermal solar as a way of heating at a low cost, and that those grants need to be opened up. But I just wonder, in terms of social housing, have you looked at solar thermal? Is that something that you became interested in, maybe hearing what she had to say?
Obviously, I think her message was around, obviously she referenced about the sort of 13 degrees element about trying to introduce a sort of minimum level of protection for properties, and actually, which was an interesting take for me in terms of some of that dynamic. It's not something that we've particularly looked at. We've been focusing some of our pilots, particularly on the air source heat pump, and we are interested, obviously, in terms of looking at options for our flatted dwellings. Obviously, Jackie referenced there about the challenge that's going to come with that across Scotland in terms of mixed tenure, especially where we might not necessarily be either in majority ownership or anywhere approaching majority ownership, and there's very limited options at present in terms of flatted dwellings apart from installation of sort of common ground source boreholes and then sharing that cost across the flat development. So yeah, technology has got to be obviously embraced and welcomed, and obviously has to be reviewed on a sort of case by case basis. So if there is a sort of movement, she reflected well in terms of some of this technology not being affected, particularly by our weather, because in some of the coldest days in January, February is where we still managed to get the rays from the sun to actually heat up the water, and then obviously boost to that. So it's a very similar technology in terms of how heat pumps and boreholes work, where you get a sort of ambient temperature, and then it obviously boosts that with the refrigerant, etc. So yeah, something for us to take on board and look at.
Okay, Thanks very much. Okay, we're going to move to RAC, and I'm going to ask the first question. And Jackie, I'm going to cue you up for that, because Gary, you've been sitting here not saying anything, but I don't want to put you on the spot right off the bat. But so, Jackie, I'd be interested if you could briefly describe the scale. The scale of the task that your authority or member organisations, your authority, have faced in dealing with RAC issues over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so it is quite an early stage for us. We have 72 properties in a specific area of Edinburgh where we know there's RAC roof panels. And of those, the council own 44 properties, so the remainder are private. So we've done all the surveys. Every single RAC panel in a council property has been surveyed, and we've got the risk assessment from our structural engineer for that, and they used the Institute of Structural Engineers guidance on how to risk assess those. Okay. So we have no critical risks, no evacuation of residents or propping required, but we do have red risks and amber and green. So we're looking at how to deal with those. We've taken forward works in a void property with structural engineers' advice on what design to use, and we've completed that void property. And so that's what we'll base. We've got 4 archetypes, and we need to look at each one separately to work out what the measured approach should be for each one. And that's the technical side of things, and there's the other challenges on the mixed tenure side. But
yes,
we'll talk about
certainly. Okay, great. Come to you, Gary. Yep.
Sure, thanks. Similar situation with Dundee. If we go back maybe a couple of years, we didn't know where RAC was. We didn't have an inventory of property types, so we had to do a lot of investigation with stock that was built within 1950 to 1980s. That was about 2,500 houses that we ring-fenced and had to do investigative analysis into to determine what the actual construction was. And we've rationalised that to 81 blocks of flats that have RAC and 293 cottages. Of those, 79 blocks of flats have council tenants or are in mixed tenure, and 172 cottages are council tenanted. They were predominantly built in a 3-year period between 1967 and 1970 in Dundee. So it's a real locus and hot pot of when they were built. What I would say is that having done those investigations, we're confident that's where and only where RAC exists.
Okay.
Similar to Edinburgh, we've undertaken inspections of the RAC estate, and barring 1 or 2 properties which had very specific issues, none of our properties are in a critical condition. So we're able to maintain, through a risk basis, the properties being occupied.
Okay, great.
Similar, we're looking at trial repairs this summer on the various archetypes that we've got. We've got roughly 5 or 6 different property types, so we're looking at trial repairs for those. And it was heartening to hear today that Edinburgh independently are looking at a similar remedial scheme to Dundee, which is either 2 minds thinking alike or the alternative.
Thanks for that picture. Anybody else want to come in on their picture of RAC? Murray?
Yeah, so as colleagues have alluded to, when the media attention and obviously the word went out about obviously the unfortunate incident at the school where there was a ceiling collapse, obviously our focus primarily was on our public buildings and obviously the schools at that stage. And early on, whilst we were still completing that work, we had notification via through an owner-occupier who had a surveyor out to his property who the surveyor had identified what he felt was RAC and actually had called us out to do further work. That then led to us then focusing on our housing estate. We obviously have 3 blocks where the situation in terms of the independent structural engineers and in terms of the council's building control was at a stage where they felt that it was critical, and obviously those 3 blocks have been decanted in Tillicoultry. We have a further 7 or 8 blocks within Tillicoultry, all in Tillicoultry, which have RAC. We have done checks across our entire rest of our housing stock like most of our colleagues here, in terms of to get that level of confidence that it wasn't elsewhere within the stock. So we do know that, for example, it is located all within Tillicooty, and sometimes that beyond the scope of the actually flat developments, including pram stores, bin stores, etc. So in terms of, obviously, we're engaging with those homeowners who have been decanted from the blocks, and obviously, like colleagues have indicated there, our most recent discussions with the homeowners related to proposals in terms of remedial roof replacement. And obviously this is where obviously the sector and obviously the industry itself has started to gain confidence in terms of some of the works that might be required. So there's been a lot of learning and understanding from proposals that have been taken forward, particularly down in England in terms of some of the public building estate, where works have been done to actually replace roofs. So that's some of the learning now that we're taking forward in Scotland, and it was based on those discussions that we had some interactions with our decanted owners. And in terms of some of the other blocks, obviously we call them manage and monitor, and obviously like colleagues have referenced, it's based on a risk-based system, and obviously one of the aspects that we're looking at is in terms of looking at the deflection scores to make sure that they're correctly rated in terms of that red, amber, green, which Jackie referenced earlier.
Okay, great. Ewan, do you want to come in and give us the picture in Angus?
Yep, sure. So we've surveyed our estate, and there are 25 Angus Council homes that have been found to have rack roof panels, all in the one street in Monifieth. So it's part of a development of 75 homes built in 1966. The properties are terraced 1 and 2 bedroom properties, a mix of 1 and 2 stories. Right to buy has meant that we don't have outright ownership of any single whole terrace, which can further complicate things as well. So as with others, we've had independent structural engineers inspect. The condition of the rack in our homes is generally good. One home had more significant issues, and that required a decant. However, subsequent inspections have found that there's been no change at all in that. So it may have been a construction issue at the time they were built as well. And again, in common with others, we've implemented a regime going forward of inspections either 6 monthly or annually.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I'm going to bring in Megan Gallagher with a number of questions.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, panel. You've given a brief overview in relation to what the RAC situation looks like in each of your areas. But as we know, with RAC remediation, that comes at a cost. So I'm wondering, have you done an overall costing in terms of how much this is going to cost your areas individually? How will this be paid for? And what role should the Scottish Government play in supporting social landlords and councils dealing with RAC issues? And I don't know who wants to take that, because that's probably a really big question. Jackie, do you maybe want to start?
Yeah, we can remember all the questions in there. We have allocated, as part of the capital budget for 25-26, an allocation for RAC, for resolving the issues in our own council homes. And it's over £2 million at the moment. How the government can help with the situation, it was probably more to do with how we deal with the private owner situation here, our powers, how they're limited in certain circumstances around access to homes to do the work, and decanting private homeowners to do the work where we're in a mixed tenure block and we share ownership. So we want to take the lead in this work. We're being really open and transparent with the owners and tenants, providing all the copies of reports so that everybody can see what we've done so far, telling them that we don't have all the answers yet, but we're working to find out the answers and just being open with them. I was actually had an owners meeting last night for owners' properties with RAC. And there's going to be individual circumstances related to each owner, I think, that we'll have to deal with. But they've got a number of issues. I don't know if you want me to go into them right now, but it's really related to the valuation of properties, the insurance of properties, and the mortgageability of properties. So all of that is uncertain. It seems that there's not a consistent approach across lenders and insurance body or the valuation surveyors. I would like to know what does a valuation surveyor's what would be the outcome of a valuation surveyor's position after the rack is repaired or remediated, or there's no risk anymore? Will the property value reflect the market value that it was at before or not? So this is a real moving picture, and I think we need to have some guidance from some professional bodies as to how we deal with that, and that we make this approach consistent across valuers across Scotland. Would be helpful.
It's a really important point, particularly in relation, as you say, to make sure that the valuation matches the remedial work that's been done, but also to make sure that it doesn't fall behind just because of what has happened as well, particularly in areas, and as you say, across the board as well, up and down the country. Gary, I'm wondering if you've had a costing associated with the remediation work that you've undertaken.
We haven't had costings yet. That's part of the reason for the pilot repairs, is to undertake these works, then look at the scalability thereafter of those works to make sure that we can actually get sensible prices. One of the issues is there's no database of costs for remediating RAC. They're all very specific to property types, so very sensitive to the market. I would guess after the pilot repairs we'd be in a position to more accurately reflect on what those costs are. And then look at our capital plan for rolling that out to council and mixed tenure stock. I completely agree with the sentiments made before on owner-occupiers and how that then transfers to their mortgageability and insurability.
Of course. Does anyone else want to come in at this point in time? Murray?
Yeah, just in terms of we were halfway through or going through our business planning period, looking at our capital programme. So as part of the finalisation of that capital programme, I've obviously reflected earlier on in terms of stock condition survey. So that's going to look at the blocks where we are managing and monitoring to build up the cost base for those. The ones where we've got obviously decanted, we obviously have discussed with the owners the likely contribution. So you're ranging from about £20,000 per individual owner for just the roof replacement to about £30,000 for a more wholesale solution in terms of roof, render, energy efficiency works, etc. So obviously that comes at a significant challenge for a number of those owner-occupiers in terms of the value of those works versus the assumed value, or what might be the assumed value once those works are completed, in terms of whether they've still got mortgages or whether they've got equity in the house, whatever. So real challenges in terms of some of that affordability for some of these repairs. But as Jackie's indicated there, obviously we've had the wider group discussion to introduce the fact that we are looking at this as a consideration for an option. But obviously, as Jackie says, a lot of these discussions will need to be quite intense, going into the personal details, so have to be individualised. So it's quite resource intensive for us as landlords leading on those conversations as well.
Absolutely.
Susie and then Ewan wanted to come in.
So in terms of the extent of the issue for housing associations and cooperatives, the regulators identified that 7 registered social landlords have identified the presence of RAC in some of their homes, and two more RSLs are still investigating whether RAC is present. The regulator provided guidance on how to assess and manage the risk of RAC, and which sets out the stages of action in terms of establishing the presence of RAC. And affected members of undertaking comprehensive programmes of surveys and inspections to identify properties within their stock, both the houses that they own and any private houses where the members act as property factors that might contain RAC, so visual assessments and more in-depth surveys. And where privately owned properties are located within blocks where RAC has been identified in communal areas, members are working with property owners to try and ensure that necessary monitoring and remedial works are carried out. Now, in terms of the financial implications, obviously, as people have already explained, identifying and replacing RAC panels in housing stock can be very expensive. And members may struggle with the high costs of remedial works or full-scale replacements of affected building elements. And obviously, the need to divert funds to address RAC-related issues can potentially limit investment in other essential housing improvements or new housing developments. And insurance and liability has obviously been mentioned before. Housing associations, we've recently done some research to outline the challenges that housing associations face in obtaining appropriate property cover anyway, and insurance coverage for RAC-related risks may be problematic in terms of increased premiums or insurers refusing coverage, which obviously is a significant issue. So I think it's certainly fair to say that the financial challenges of dealing with this situation may well impact on a range of landlords' kind of business plans, affecting their ability to build new homes and upgrade existing ones, and particularly people's ability to meet net zero requirements. And obviously it's potentially disruptive to tenants, with the extent of that disruption being dependent on the response.
That's really helpful, Susie. Thank you.
Ewan, yes.
Ewan?
Hi there. Yes, so in terms of what we're doing in Angus, we've just recently completed an options appraisal based on guidance by our independent structural expert. That's complete now and it's due to go to a housing committee at the end of April. There were 5 options within that with a kind of sliding scale in terms of the extent of the work. So for our 25 homes that are impacted, we're looking at a cost ranging from anything from about 200,000 up to 1.2 million. The preferred option at the moment, which for us currently we're looking at removing the rack and replacing it with a timber deck roof with a new insulated roof to current standards and a single ply membrane. That has been costed at closer to $1 million, about 900,000. But that is certainly the preferred option. And what flows from that is, because we've got junctions with neighbouring properties that are owner-occupied or are privately let, there's a real need to engage with owners as well. And that's our aspiration. So that's our ask as part of the options appraisal, is that we get permission to really get into the trenches with the owners and see if we can adopt collaborative solutions with them. And it sounds similar to certainly what Park Manager are talking about, and actually by extension Edinburgh as well. Just so that's where we are at the moment with it.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much. Convener, actually, I think the further questions that I had in relation to the support the local authorities or housing associations and its members have provided to tenants, I think that's already been heavily touched upon. And then, of course, in relation to private homeowners found to be living in properties with RAC elements as well, again, that's been touched upon. Yep. I don't want to stray into questions that other members are going to ask as well, so I'll leave it there, but thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks very much, Megan. Okay, I'm now going to bring in Mark Griffin with a number of questions. Mark.
Thanks, Convener. I wonder if I can come back to you, Ewan. I'm particularly interested in how landlords, local authorities are dealing with the issue of terraced blocks and the presence of RAC. We know that some of the RAC panels will straddle across multiple properties, so I mean it's effectively impossible to remediate perhaps a property that comes under Angus Council without doing a neighbouring owner-occupied or private let property. And I'm just wondering whether the legal framework that exists at the moment actually is stopping you doing what you need to do. I mean, I don't want to say it's almost easier to do it in flats, but at least there is a legal framework when it comes to tenements and flatted developments, when it comes to legal obligations on shared roof spaces. But I'm thinking about this particular example of terraced rows where is there a legal impediment to doing an entire terraced row that needs to be done because of the crossover of RAC panels between different properties?
Mark, in terms of the legal impediment, I'm not absolutely certain about whether that would be the case. I don't think so, but as I say, the approach we want to take, well, what can I say, just touching on the technical point that you made there, we've done investigations such that we know that our panels are unique to each of the properties, so they don't straddle from one terraced. So that, in theory, you think, well, that makes things easier. You could deal with your properties in their own right. However, I think if you're contemplating, as we are, an option which would be to remove the rack panels, then that's not straightforward, because you then, if you're taking the roof panels off, well, obviously you have to take the roof finishes off as well. And we've got felt roofs on these properties that we think are around about 30 years. So they're already past their serviceable life as well. So the roof finishes are in need of upgrade as well. So our approach is, as I say, we've got a preferred option. We need that to be signed off, ratified by committee. And then after that, the plan is to, as I say, engage with the owners there. Now, there are the numbers for us are maybe slightly different than other authorities. In fact, they certainly are. So there are 33 owners that are interspersed into these terraces, but our plan is to speak to all of them individually about their circumstances and how we might, open up options to find mutually beneficial solutions to the problem.
Okay, thanks, Ewan. Are there any other landlords that have got experience of panels across terraced rows, Jackie?
I was just going to say, we've got experience of being an owner in a terraced, a row of terraced houses. So we've recently discovered through the title deeds that the council actually share ownership across the whole terrace, although we only own one house in the terrace. And as you said, the legal authority to do the work under the Tenant Act doesn't work in terraced houses. So we could look at statutory notices. We could use the Edinburgh Confirmation Act, for example, which we do already in private tenements. And other properties, but that's not going to practically work to actually get the owners to agree to give us access or to move out to do the works. So there's definitely a gap there in what our powers are when it comes to remediating terraced houses.
Okay, thank you. Yep, Gary.
I think it does depend on what the solution for remediating the rack is. So if the rack's remediated from below, a new structural deck is placed entirely underneath the rack, then there's no interaction across the terrace. Dundee, similar to Angus, the rack doesn't straddle across. It butts between terraces. Similarly with Dundee being a series of hills joined by hills, a lot of these blocks of terraces are actually stepped, so there is no continuity across the roof. So that landscape's slightly different, and it does depend what the rack solution is for remediation, whether there is a party wall issue.
Okay, thanks. The other question that I had was around the development of survey and remediation guidance. We know that that's been in place for non-domestic properties, and whether that's something that you would welcome for domestic properties, and if it is, what you would potentially like to see within that guidance from government. Jackie?
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, is to have maybe an archetype-based solutions so that we can all share best practice on that. We do have the Institute of Structural Engineers guidance on the survey side, but then I think there's a gap there at the moment on what's available. What every structural engineer should be looking at, what every solution that's available and considering them all, and then we apply them to the archetypes that we've got in common. That would be really helpful.
Okay. Yep, Garrett.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. The guidance was definitely set around non-domestic properties, nice big open rooms like this one, rather than houses that have got partitions and different sort of scale of the rack. I agree that when you're looking at potential solutions for rack, some of the solutions that are identified are probably relevant for the non-domestic sector, and probably like to see archetypes brought in, not only to help engineers look at what solutions are, but also to help look at what mortgageability and insuranceability would be acceptable. So to get an agreed framework that everybody would buy into as an acceptable way of dealing with RAC.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Camilla, I'm just wondering about the knock-on impact of RAC, particularly where it's been a critical issue where it's led to decants. What's been the wider knock-on effect on council temporary accommodation provision, homelessness services, when you've had to deal with situations related to decants? Murray first.
Yeah, it was a very difficult challenge, especially the evening the building standards had indicated they were going to serve the notices. So first and foremost for us was making sure that the people protection, and we were able to try and go out and early engage with the residents in terms of trying to find them an alternative accommodation. It has had, no doubt about it, it's had an impact on our temp accommodation this year. Our numbers in terms of temp accommodation at the highest have been for a number of years. RAC, and obviously we also have works progressing on our travelling person site where we've got decanted into our own accommodation. It's had an impact, so no two ways about it. It has had an impact on our ability to offer temp accommodation within our own stock. So that's meant we've had to have placements either out with the area or in accommodation that's not owned by the council. So that puts a big burden financially on the council as well, in terms of, because it's not fully qualifying for housing benefit cost assistance.
Jackie?
Yeah, we haven't actually been in the position where we've had to decant yet, but we see that is going to have to be done when we go through the works. That is going to affect the scheduling of the works as well, because as you know, in Edinburgh, we've got a real shortage of housing. So if we agree with the local office that we have 4 or 5 properties available, we'll need to schedule the works in such a way that we use those properties sufficiently and people are moved out and then back into their properties as we go. So that will affect probably the timeline on how quickly we deliver the repairs. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, that brings us to the end of our session. It's been very helpful to have you in. So thanks so much for joining us this morning. And as that was the last public item on our agenda today, I'm now going to close the public part of the meeting.